right, welcome listeners. This is the Different Frames podcast. I'm Antonio Zapian Luna here with our co-host Greg Joya and producer David Kennedy.
Uh, Hello. This is Greg. Now you know face, voice.
So yeah, today on Different Frames we're going to be talking about the iconic film The Exorcist by William Friedkin.
Speaking of personal, we even though we live in different parts of the country, Antonio and I saw this together last week before. Well, as of this recording last week, I was in Los Angeles and we met up at the Vista Theater with some other friends, and we watched The Exorcist together. So that was fun. And what celebrity? Who was our celebrity sighting?
Oh yeah, this was funny. I mean, I can tell my perspective. I walked in to the Vista Theater, and the doors are open, and I see a mutual friend, Chris, and I go up to him and I went, did a sort of demonic blah, and like I was like, "Hey, Chris," and then he goes, "Oh, hey, Antonio," and he's talking to somebody already in the seat, and he goes, "Look who it is," and I like turned, and it was Jack Black, like sitting there, full glorious beard and long hair, so that was funny.
I walked by. I saw him like playing Candy Crush or something on his phone, but I didn't. I try not to disturb or acknowledge celebrities. In LA, you see so many,
Right.
and I just feel like let them live there. One time I couldn't resist. I was walking in Westwood, and Bob Newhart came out of the dry cleaner with his dry cleaning, and I was just like, Bob Newhart, and he said, "Yes, I am," and he put his hand out, and I shook his hand. So. But other than that, I've had them sit next to me at movie, and I just no idea who you are. So, but
Right.
yeah, Jack Black was good. They Mike and Chris, I think they talked to him. Conchetti, I think they all talked to him for a while.
Mm.
So
Yeah, because I
maybe I
saw
missed
him and I
out.
said, "Oh, hey, Jack," because I was like, "That's Jack
Yeah.
Black." But again, I was like, "Well, he's just gonna chill out, so I don't really have anything to say. I'll just leave him alone." No, it was a cool screening. You know, presented on film on a 35 millimeter print, and we ended up seeing the director's cut. So it was a really pretty pristine print, in my opinion. Like super high quality.
Yeah, I assume that must
Um,
have been restored when they made that cut a few years back. So there's
mhm.
probably some good. But yeah, it looked great. There was no problems at all. It wasn't like faded or marked up. So yeah, it
Mhm.
looked beautiful.
What did you think of the Vista, by the way? I know we talked a little bit there,
Oh
but
yeah, so I hadn't been since I when I lived in LA, I used to go there, but that was long ago. I believe the last movie I'd seen there was the Lego movie. So whenever that came
Mhm.
out, that was the last time. Since then, I guess maybe it closed or whatever, but I know that Quentin Tarantino purchased it, they remodeled it, and it looks beautiful. The seats maybe weren't. I liked that there was a ton of leg room, but the
Mhm.
seats were a little rickety, but yeah, other than the I'm not such a minor complaint. Yeah, it looks gorgeous. The
Oh yeah, the
decor,
decoration, yeah.
yeah, and the projection of it looks, it's crystal clear projection. So yeah, no, I was totally digging it. And honestly, I can't remember what it was like before in there. So
Before we get into like maybe The Exorcist, I wanted to ask, maybe what movies have you seen recently?
oh, okay, in fact I got back. I saw a movie today. I was at the movies. Got
Mhm.
home about an hour ago. Today, I don't know if you know this. Today is National Silent Movie Day. And
Mm.
theaters all over the country, I think even all over the world, are showing all kinds of silence. Some are doing really popular, Metropolis, Nosferatu. Some are doing more obscure stuff. Here in Austin, the only one I could find was Clash of the Wolves, which is something I wasn't familiar with. It's a Rin Tin Ted movie. He's the celebrity dog. He's got his star on the Walk of Fame and everything. And I have a 6 and an 8 year old son. I have two sons, 6 and 8. I took them, and they both they started out. The younger one is Carmine. couple minutes in, he's like tugging my shirt. I was like, maybe he wants to go. He's like, at first I didn't like it, but now I really like it. And then the rest of the movie, he was just wrapped. And then
Mm.
Giacomo, the older boy, same thing. At first, he's like, "Is this a gray movie?" It's like, "It's a gray movie with no talking." No, he used to like silence, but now he's a little older. He used to be a big Mary Pickford fan, but then same thing. Within 5 minutes, he was just locked into the screen. They were both riveted the whole way. Um, it's a dog. There's some puppies. It's exciting. There's a lot of dogs chasing other dogs and chasing people, but it was fun. And I had never seen a Rin Tin Tin silent, so it was cool for me too. Anything else you guys have seen noteworthy?
I saw. I went to a Hong Kong double feature at the New Beverly last Monday. It was City War with Chow Yun Fat, which is a pretty classic like heroic bloodshed movie. The characters like get shot 30 times by the end. They just keep on trucking until they get the like villain or whatever. And that was double featured with Legend of Wisely, which is a very baffling
I don't know that one.
kind of Hong Kong Indiana Jones
Oh, I don't
movie
know that
that
one.
was like co-funded by like a travel agency is what the reveal in the credits. So it was all the location work was all like places this travel agency does tours to. So it's
Oh,
like
interesting.
they're like uncovering mysteries in the pyramids, and then they're in Tibet, and then it's
You
uh
can do it too. Fly on
right.
China Air.
It's like I'm
Yeah,
not gonna necessarily it wasn't necessarily good, but it was truly zany in a way that I was not anticipating. So
that
that was
sounds
like
fun.
a fun screening recently for me.
Trying to think. I've seen.
Um,
I go to the movies so often, but there's a couple I've
mm,
seen that I think are worth mentioning. One film is Tempopo,
Mm,
which I'd heard of but never seen. And then a friend of mine, that's one of his favorite movies. So when we found out it was showing locally, we went, and it was totally not what I expected. It's almost like what do you like Airplane or one of these like crazy slapstick level comedies, but then mixed in with more like a story. It's hard to describe. It was really entertaining. I loved it, but very different from most movies I've seen. And then another one that was really different is you guys ever see The Baby? Kind of like a
no.
early '70s exploitation film. I don't want to spoil anything. I'll just give you the most basic. It's
oh wait,
just
I think I actually do know what this
Wait, is
is, but
this
keep talking.
what's his name? The producer, Corman?
Roger Corman.
he might have been invited. It seems like his kind of thing. It's done by
Yes,
is
this
his
is the
name
movie. I think it is.
Post? It's the guy that directed like Magnum Force and Hang 'em High. He's like actually a
Ted
legit
Post.
Oh
director.
no,
Ted
I've
Post, yeah.
seen
Um,
those.
but it's like exploitation. There's like a woman who has a couple daughters and a son. I think three different fathers. The most recent one, I guess, left her, and as like punishment to him, she's raised his son to be a baby. So he's like late 20s, but he still wears a diaper and drinks a bottle. And then this social worker comes along, and the social worker is trying to like fix this problem. But there's so much more to it, and it's the kind of thing where like a lot of movies, especially those like Corman type with exploitation films, so much happens that you're like, they just that's how they did it. So the movie would like there's no rhyme or
Yeah,
reason to it, and there's all these moments like that. But then by the end, it all comes together, and you realize like every single it's almost like Capra, like where everything was there for a reason. Everything, and it's goofy and it's exploitative, but it's really well made. I walked out shocked that I actually really enjoyed it and like respected it. It wasn't just like sometimes like it's a bad movie, but it was a good movie in a lot of weird ways. So um,
no,
I don't know.
no,
Oh, and
yeah,
then I saw
that looks insane.
they did a couple 70 millimeter shows near me. They did The Searchers in 2001, and those were just so much fun to
Oh, nice.
see, just giants.
Sure.
But yeah, um, I'd say I'm actually contemplating buying the Blu-ray of The Baby just to have that on hand to show it to somebody. That's how much I liked it. But anyway, what about you? Anything else?
I watched the movie The Substance. I don't know if you guys seen that. It's a
I know
newer
of it, but I
film.
haven't seen it. Is it as good as they say?
Um, I mean, I'm kind of like I love body horror trash cinema, and this is like right up there as like Cronenberg meets Paul Verhoeven kind of satire. Like, I don't think it's gonna be for everybody because it's very like disgusting, and it's not very subtle. It's kind of in your face, and as some satires are, like something like South Park. It's like the jokes are maybe presented obviously in a certain sense, but it's for a purpose ultimately, and it's mostly to get like the story moving along. Um, it was hard to watch a little bit, and I'm not that squeamish, but towards
Hmm.
the end, it just devolves into like just the most insane like horror movie, splatter, just insane amount of blood, and I was laughing. I was like, I cannot believe that like they're doing this, and that people are gonna come out for it, because of the actors like Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley. So they'll probably get a little like shocked,
Yeah.
But I had a fun time watching it. I thought it was hilarious.
That's not usually my genre, but I've heard enough
Mhm.
about it that I probably will see it.
All right, well, maybe we can get into the bulk of what we're talking about, The Exorcist.
That wasn't either of our first time seeing it.
I had seen it before. Growing up, I kind of watched, bits and pieces here, and then I had, I think in film school or sometime, I was like, okay, I'm such a big horror fed. Horror head. I'm gonna have to like, I have to watch this all the way through. So I
Sure, yeah.
did back then, and it had an effect on me. I will say, seeing it in the theater though, and like, it was kind of a new experience for me.
Yeah, same. I'd seen it once or twice on like a TV. I think as a kid, I saw it. I don't know if we rented it or if it was on. I think we must have rented it because it was. I remember it being pretty gruesome, and I don't think they would have shown that on network TV. And then again, when I was, probably in my 20s, so I hadn't seen it for a long time, and never in a theater. So, and I'd never seen the director's cut,
Mhm.
which
Well, let me ask you, do you remember the first time you saw it?
I remember. I was probably somewhere between like 12 around that age. I was, young but not super young. I think
Mhm.
my family watched it. I think we did rent it because I remember after that we rented the sequel and we thought it was pretty terrible. That Exorcist
Mm.
2, The Heretic, and we just, we thought the first one was good, the second one was not good. But I can't remember. I remember certain things that like. I remember what I remember, but I couldn't tell you if I was 11 or 14 or I was like early teens or almost a teen when I saw it. Do you remember specifically watching it that as a kid or the parts you'd seen or?
Well, I have like a very specific story, kind of like a traumatic story, but like at this point, uh, it's far enough removed that I like horror movies now, but at the time I was, a kid. I was probably like 10 years old, maybe even 8 years old,
Oh, wow,
and I
you
had gone out in the morning. We had gone on like a little Cub Scout retreat, just a little hike.
mhm.
And at the end of the hike, I'm, playing on this little playground, going on the monkey bars, and I slip off the monkey bars and I fall, straight on my back on the
Oh,
ground. So the wind gets knocked out of me, and I'm, it hurt a lot, and I kind of was in pain, and everyone was like, oh, we don't know if he's broken something, we don't know what's happened. So ambulance gets called, get sent to the hospital. This is my first time going to the hospital too. They do like these X-rays of me, make sure everything's okay. Everything was fine. They were just like, okay, that wind got knocked out of him. But I just remember laying in like a room by myself on the hospital bed, and there's the one TV on the other side. And for some reason, it had the like climactic scene of The Exorcist on, where the priest are, performing the exorcism, and she's levitating, and her scars are like going crazy, and I was, like, screaming at the top of my lungs, like, turn it off," because I didn't know what was happening, and,
that
someone, I
is
think,
not
rushed in and
appropriate for
turned.
children's
I
hospital.
know. I don't It was a children's I think it was because it was in the X-ray, area,
X-ray,
so maybe.
like, yeah, they got
Yeah.
some wires crossed, but,
Right.
that's
But so that
torture.
that really just stuck in my head for a long time, and, obviously, like, I wasn't old enough to see the movie, but I had seen that scene, so kind of references, cultural references. I was always like
Did you
thinking
know at the
about
time
that.
it was The Exorcist, or was it, like, years later you saw The Exorcist, you were like, "Oh my god, this is the movie."
Yeah, I think it was after I was like, "Oh, that's the movie." Um, but yeah, that imagery really stuck in my head. I mean, it's very evocative anyway. Well, I just remember a little bit later, I went to a wax museum in Mexico City,
Mhm.
and they have a horror section at the end. And I was like, I'm a little bit older, I can handle this. And my dad's like, yeah, go. And then I start walking in, and like one of the first things is the Reagan animatronic going like standing up and then turning its head around, and it was just like I was like, ah, and I ran back out.
Yeah, you were not ready after all. Yeah,
No.
when I was a kid, so I grew up in the pre-cable TV era where you had basically the three exit. There was NBC, ABC, CBS. That was it. You had a PBS channel, and there was one local station. And I don't know what the law is now, but back then, like the local station would play films with like nudity and like it was just anything goes. They probably FCC has changed things now, but I remember one time I walked in, my dad was watching Taxi Driver, and I just happened to walk in the scene when they're in that pornographic movie, and I was probably 8, 9 years, like a little kid, and I was just like, "Oh, what's this?" And like, I just remembered that like weird scene that my parents like, "Oh, get out!" And they chased me out. But then I had just blanked that memory, forgot. But then like in college, I went to the theater, saw Taxi Driver. I was like, "That's the thing. That's the creepy memory from that really happened. That movie exists." So it's weird these things will stay in your mind with no real context or understanding, and then you grow up and you see it again, and you're like, I get it now.
Mm. Let me ask you, did you grow up Catholic, Greg?
Half-assedly at first, like my parent, we didn't
Hmm.
go to church, and then at some point, my mom became a little more religious, so she wouldn't go, but she would drop me and my sister off at church, so we'd go to church, and then a little later after that, she started going too. So it was kind of like I got kind of like a half-assed Catholic education, or um, but not hardcore. Like we weren't like super. I couldn't name all the saints or all
Hmm.
the I learned a little more later. But were you super Catholic? Did you have a very Catholic upbringing?
Well, my parents thought it would be important for me to at least grow up with some sort of exposure to religion. They kind of always were like, we're going to do Catholicism because I like this church and I like what it has to say. But they were always like, you can have an open mind. We'll go to other temples like Hindu, and just so you get the idea. But
Oh
as
wow,
far as consistency, they would take me to the Catholic Church. And interesting enough, the Catholic Church I grew up at in St. Louis happened to be the Catholic Church in which the priest who had done the exorcism that the book is based off of, he taught at that college church. So I guess the book is based around the church that I had gone to growing up.
I should
Uh,
grab my. I have that book. Where is that book? I'm
I
scanning my
think it's a
bookshelf.
little, yeah, I think it's different because I think it was a boy instead of a girl, and he obviously changed things for the movie. But I guess growing up Catholic, it seemed that the exorcism was like
Oh,
always like
nice.
a, oh, there he's got the copy. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Growing up, yeah, growing up Catholic, it seemed like the exorcisms were like not very serious. Like they even had it within that church, even that supposedly this thing had taken place. Um, it was kind of seen as like a little bit kind of like, oh, it was just a spooky ghost tale. It wasn't
Hmm.
given super like a lot of credence. So I'm kind of wondering, as far as your upbringing and your exposure to the culture, maybe a little bit closer after the movie had come out, what was your perception or the people around you's perception of, as far as like this movie in relation to religion or their own beliefs?
Everyone, even one of my close friends was like very Catholic. He wanted to be a priest when he grew up. But even he, like everybody, kind of acknowledged that it was all just that it didn't. There were not really demons taking over, and exorcisms weren't real. And like I never met anyone or any. Now maybe privately they thought otherwise, but like I don't ever recall anybody at the church, the priests or anyone who are like exorcisms are real. It seemed like it was understood. It was a It was a horror story.
For Halloween one year, I went to Catholic high school and grade school. Um, and on Halloween one year, they told us the story presented completely as fact
Oh,
in my religion class. Um,
wow.
because it was took place in St. Louis. They were like, yeah, like we got firsthand testimony from people here. They took the entire St. Louis University football team to hold the kid down during the middle of the exorcism. They're like fully presented it as this is a true event that occurred 2 miles from here or whatever. To this day, I know people who are like terrified of the movie for that reason.
Right, this has become, like, the sort of reference point for, like, this thing, the exorcism, like, and obviously, there's been hundreds of, derivative movies.
So I actually saw a double feature at the New Beverly before I went to the Vista, and then I took a cab or an Uber, I guess, but in my head they're all cabs. But on that cab ride, I mentioned to the driver, and he instantly launched into like the entire duration of the ride. It's like, oh, that's true, and that also here, and this happened. He had this whole middle catalog of all these demonic possessions, and he was just he it was all fact to him. It was just like, it was a documentary I was on the way to see.
So in your opinion, what do you think is more of a terrifying, like, interpretation, personally for you? Like, this sort of psychological horror aspect or the faith-based horror aspect? Because the movie kind of does a good job of balancing both of them so that I think, I even think the Catholic Church kind of was like, this is a faith-based movie. It's actually like a pretty good movie. Um, but it never like fully is like sort of preaching or anything like that. So I'm wondering your personal
Yeah.
take on it.
I think you made the point when we were all, doing that thing where you stand in front of the theater and talk about the movie that night. I think you were the one that had said how you liked the way the director's cut really, and if it wasn't you, one of us said this, that the director's cut kind of really did the due diligence of like exhausting the possibilities that was psychological to kind of really be like, okay, look, it's a demon. Like we did this, we did scan that, we did the blood test.
Mhm.
So I think the film, it does. I agree. It really it explores it, like, could it be a psychological phenomenon? Could it be a physical phenomenon? But then once it all, she's floating, her head, like, obviously, it was a demon. It was not a disease. I personally think it's much more frightening if I was given the choice of living in a world where, you could have some psychological illness where you think you're possessed versus a world where demons are just out. I'd much rather take the one where it's like, I'd like to see a therapist, not a priest. So, I don't want actual demons, taking over. That's too scary. That's
Mhm.
too dangerous. What about you? Would you? I mean, I would think that would be everyone's answer, but maybe not. Or maybe that wasn't maybe I misunderstood the question.
I guess I was thinking, no, no, you answered the question uh, the way I posed it. I think for me, I think seeing it this time too, kind of brought to light some subtextual interpretations of the movie where I don't, obviously I think the things are really happening in the world of the movie as far as like
Mhm.
demonic possession and what the characters are seeing and experiencing. I think for me personally, these sort of mixes between psychology and spirituality and this sort of like thin line between them for me is like as I've gotten older is more like terrifying, and sort of the more subtextual story that I was getting through it was like the story of this girl kind of experiencing some abuse that the movie doesn't show directly, but I had kind of heard that interpretation before and I was always like, huh. But this time seeing the movie, I think there was a few things where they kind of allude to her being sort of secretly like abused, maybe potentially by the director character. And I was kind of looking a little bit up, and it said that like Pazuzu as a demon is a demon that scares off other demons when it inhabits like a person. It's there to sort of it's an evil force, but it is used to like scare off other demons. And it's interesting to me that we see well, we don't see the director characters get killed, but he's like the only character until the end that is directly killed by um, Reagan. And so my kind of thinking about this movie was that there's these two sort of things going on. And one story is kind of subtextual, and then there's this, real story of, the priest battling with the devil. And my thinking is that, maybe the story is presented in this way because it is almost easier to see this in this light, this story, than if we were to watch a direct story of like, just a straight on drama of like abuse of this girl. Like that would probably be too much and that would probably be like not very entertaining, but having this sort of spiritual element to it and this sort of horror element to it allows for this, whatever messages about faith and relationships between families that William Friedkin wanted to explore, he could put it into this movie, and
It's
everyone
interesting to
would
think
flock to
about
go
that.
see
Yeah.
it. Hmm.
I guess, I mean, a lot of times it's, I find myself, I'll think about a movie and things that it could mean, and like probably what I'm about to do now, but yeah, like there could be some interpretation where the director friend was molesting Reagan, and maybe she, in an attempt to stop it or get rid of him or get revenge, kind of maybe not knowingly summoned that demon, who is the demon that chases the other demons away. So she, like, in desperation, she opened herself up to Pazuzu to eradicate the director. But then, of course, she becomes victim to him, and that's why the priest has to be there. And then maybe the priest at the end, when he calls the demon to him, in a way, he's doing the same thing, where he's actually taking Pazuzu to get rid of Pazuzu. But I don't know how much of that is really explicitly stated in the film. But I mean, you could make that case, or it could be metaphorical, where, like, we're seeing that demon is the after effect of the director was doing things he shouldn't have done to her, and those are like the scars she carries with her, and she needed someone like, the priest or someone that to kind of take it on, or to help her. I mean, it's all speculation, but I can understand. I see where you're coming from, and I think it's actually a very observant observation, or clever observation.
I think that might be also why this movie is so much. It's held in so much better regard than a lot of the other exorcism movies, is because there is all this like room for interpretation and a lot of things we don't directly see as the audience. Whereas, and I think in some other movies, it's just like, oh, it's the devil, and like, she's crawling on the ceiling.
Yeah,
There's all this build up and relationships and stories presented.
yeah, and that's true too. I think that's partly a product of the time. I think films
Mm.
in the past, more than today, did take their time to introduce things and build up, and they kind of gave you the excitement at the end. Whereas
Mhm.
now there tends to be this need to just hit you with it over, like the whole movie is just, you know the demon, the demon, the demon, the demon, the end. Um, I recently saw the movie Miss 45,
Oh
and I was
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
thinking of it in comparison to Death Wish. How Death Wish, the first half of the film is just getting to know Bronson, and there's the tragedy and his and I'm like, it's really far into it where he actually starts going around. And whereas Miss 45, it's just like bam, and then the whole movie is, it's like Death Wish without the plot, without the character development, just bam, kill, kill, kill. And so I think that is kind of like, these early 70s, there was an era of, whether by creative choice or just because that was the norm. Yeah, you did build up to it, and I think that makes it very effective. I think by the time you fully see the demon in play and the exorcism underway, like, you care about those characters, and you're ready for that. It's not just, a demon movie. It's a people movie.
Well, it's just such great casting. Whoever, what's her name, Linda Blair, the young girl.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I know they went through some rigorous like casting process to find an unknown actor. But I think the second she shows up on the screen, you sort of have this. You're just kind of like enamored with her personality, and she has like a bright, joyful personality, and with her and her mother, and then so it's all the more shocking when she's like just completely a different character just completely possessed by this demon, and it's really great. It's
I
frightening.
hadn't thought about it at the time, but I wonder how old was the the girl that played Reagan?
She was
Like,
about 14.
God, that's kind of weird that like I was reading recently, I think it was The Shining, where
Mhm.
the yeah, it
Mhm.
was the kid that played Danny had no idea he was acting in a horror film. He just did his parts and he was doing like a family drama. And it wasn't until he was grown up that he saw it. But I don't see how you could have a girl
No.
doing some of the things she does and saying those things and not have her be totally aware that she's in some messed up demon. Like,
I do know that, as far as, like, the demon's voice, they had another actor recording those. I would assume, though, she was saying the lines because it would be too hard to, like,
yeah.
really dub that over, but,
But even some of the
I just
physical
looked.
action.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the scene where she's, like, I don't know how they did it, but she's, going up and down on the bed.
Yeah.
I I just physically, that seems like a large ask to put anyone through,
Yeah.
let alone a 14-year-old girl.
But I'm thinking like when she's got the cross and she's like
Oh, yeah.
basically I don't want to. Yeah, I'm a grown man. I don't want to say it out loud, and yet they've
Yeah.
got this little girl
Right.
doing it. Um,
Mhm.
I don't know how you could film that without her just being aware of what she was doing. Although it was the '70s, maybe it was a different time. Maybe they just
Yeah.
that's what 14-year-olds did back then. I don't know.
I mean, and I think, Friedkin has sort of reputation of being, a director who's going to push the actors, and
Yeah,
I mean, I think people had complaints about him on this film. He puts them through a lot of
yeah.
physical and emotionally draining stuff, and it really comes through. I mean, even just, let's say, the scenes where they're in the room and it's cold and you can see their breath, like,
Yeah.
I'm thinking that must be so miserable, but you can, in the little shaking of their hands, it's just emoting so much.
And to answer the question about Linda Blair here, as there was some doubles used for some of the more explicit images, but really her main problems that she encountered was just the physicality of the role, just being in really cold rooms for large portions of the filming and a costume that did not do much to keep her warm, as well as the harness they used to get her to like fly around and thrash and stuff, like hurt her spine pretty bad. But and then afterwards, she, as a kid, did not really understand much of what was going on in the movie. But then
Mhm.
afterwards, of course, media and like critics and stuff had a lot of questions for her about like the themes of the movie that she was very
Yeah.
ill-equipped to answer. So yeah, that was what I gathered from just a not great article that I just kind of read through.
Yeah. Very interesting. Let me ask you this too. What do you think of the film overall, just the overall quality? And B, what did you, if you can recall what, like I looked it up after what was added, but if you know, like, do you think the director's cut made it better or worse?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. As far as the quality, I think I'm always astounded by William Friedkin's, like, cinematography and editing. I think,
Hmm.
he has a lot of attention to detail, not only in, like, the technical qualities, but these sort of rigorous examinations of what people in the scenes are doing and how things are done. Like, let's say these scenes of, her going through the hospital treatments where we're seeing them put, I don't know what exactly it is. It's probably a liquid or something into her to get MRIs.
It's a
I
die,
guess it's
yeah.
not an MRI. These sort of scans of her brain.
Yeah.
We're seeing every little tiny moment, and these are all things that have to be thought out. They have to be lit, and it ultimately serves this purpose of tension and kind of explaining the amount of effort that would go into these things, and it shouldn't be just taken lightly. That, like, is a huge, like, production quality for me as far as these movies go, and they just keep adding to that suspense. So on top of that, very good cinematography, sound design, all these things kind of just work to sort of envelop me into the movie a lot, especially seeing it on the big screen. And I think that's is what like sets it apart from a lot of movies in the genre. I think a lot of horror movies obviously have like a lower budget, and doesn't necessarily affect the quality of the film. But when you have this time and attention that William Friedkin does, and the access to the studios that gave him, it allows for this like top quality film, and I think that's why it's so regarded. And I don't know if it got any like Academy Awards, but it stands the test of time because they put in like all this effort.
So yeah, it won some technical awards, but didn't win it like picture or anything.
What was Best Picture that year?
The Sting won Best Picture that
Oh,
year.
okay.
Would you believe it?
Well,
Sting.
I agree with that. I think The Sting's a much better movie. So
And speaking, I guess, just on those harness stuff and like these effects, what I found impressive about this viewing was that how quick the editing is in those like scenes. And I think it's effective because, obviously they're not using CGI, they're kind of doing it all practically. But I think the amount of time that you're seeing these things happen on screen is enough for you to take it in. But it's also maybe a magician trick of like, did you really see that? And I think a lot of people have this sort of, obviously this effect of like seeing more than what they thought they did because, there's this attention to the edit and the
Mhm.
effects. The only thing that I thought was different in my mind was this, like, they added, the spider walk down the stairs,
Mhm.
and I think they added, some more, like, overlays or, like, CGI, like there's,
I
like, one
noticed
shot where
those.
yeah, Pazuzu's, like, in the corner of the
There was
shot.
in the kitchen or something. He was like on the hood of the stove.
Yeah,
Those were a little
and then
bit
the
cheesy, I
statue.
thought. Yeah,
Yeah, that's what
I
I
liked
kinda
it.
thought, and I thought, the spider walk, it was kind of scary, but I think it kind of was a weirdly paced moment in the film. I think it kind of interrupted a little bit of tension for me. There was more of a build before, like a slower build, and that was a moment where it was like just kind of a little bit shocking for shock's sake. I don't know. How did you
Yeah,
feel about that?
yeah, I thought the same thing. I thought it was just as a scene, it was effective and creepy and a
Hmm.
shocking scene, but it may have let a little of the cat out of the bag early. I think saving all of that kind of stuff for the finale worked better than because seeing that you kind of had this sense of what she was capable of or what she was, and then I don't like maybe they could have incorporated it some other way, but yeah, where they put it, it felt unnecessary and almost like it detracted from what came later. I looked it up and it said there were 10 minutes of dialogue scenes added in the director's cut. They
Wow.
said a lot of the early scenes they expanded on, like they had a whole, I think that one where they were going in her neck artery and the blood was spurting, that whole scene, I believe, was just
Mm.
director's cut. And then there was a scene where the two priests were talking. I've already forgot, but there was. I remember the scene when I read about it, but I can't now remember what it was. But there was some scene where they had a. Oh, when he tells him his middle name, the priest tells the other priest his middle name. And honestly, like of all the things they listed, nothing. Maybe the medical scene to like add a little more drama there, but I don't think anything added to it. And when I watched it, I did feel like it was dragging a little. Like as I was watching the movie, I was like,
Yeah.
I don't remember it being quite this bloated at the beginning. And I think that may have been it, that extra probably 9.5 minutes in the front of the film that wasn't there. Uh, I don't think it was necessary. So I think I might have liked it better the way it was before. And I was actually talking with Mike, who we also saw it with afterwards, and we were talking about some of the kind of the pacing and plot of the movie. A lot of like the entire opening in Iraq,
Mhm.
you could eliminate that and not change anything. And even
Yeah,
with it, it's not
what do you
clear
think that
what
does for the movie?
very little. I mean, you could say, well, gee, did he awaken an evil into the world, or like he's got that scene where he's kind of hallucinating or seeing the demon in the desert that he's later sitting there. You think he's about to die. Um, I don't know. I think part of the trouble with that too is so you've got this whole opening in Iraq that has no bearing on anything to come, and then a whole bunch of the movie goes on, and then we see the guy going through which actually a really good scene where that guy is kind of going through the forest finding the old priest, and they allude to him having done an exorcism that nearly killed him. I think it
Mhm.
might have been a more effective. If you want to start with something else, start the film with him leaving the wherever it was, what this exorcism that killed him. Have him like you see him just after that on death's door, if they wanted to show that, um, and just leave it at that. The first half has a lot of those problems that I find in a lot of '70s films, where it is kind of slow and disjointed, seemingly on purpose. Um, it doesn't always have to be like this totally seamless plot necessarily, but I think they could have tightened it up a lot. I think there were a lot of things that were said and done. So the mom is an actress, and we even see her playing the role. Why? Why did we need to see her on the steps doing the protest with all the extras? Why is she
Mhm.
even like that? Never came into play. That's just and again, I know that some people just love that. They love the realness and the grittiness, and but I think yeah, that once the movie gets to the exorcism and hits its stride, it's brilliant. But I think the path there could have been significantly cleaned up. So
Mhm.
I mean, I think the director's cut, to go circle back, the director's cut, I think it accentuates all the worst moments of the film. Like there was
Mhm.
nothing added in the director's cut that I think made it a better movie.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's interesting because the William Friedkin movies I've seen, they all kind of do that in a way, is like have these sort of long openings, lots of people, lots of scenes, lots of build up, and the immediate effect on the story on the last half, it's not that evident. Um, that's something I still continuously, when I watch his movie, I try to like think about that and ruminate about that. Again, with this movie, that opening in Iraq, that's something I keep going back to. I'm like, what really is the point besides, setting up that Zuzu, is an ancient demon. I think that's, the main story thing that does. But besides that, it's like you said, unclear. Yet I keep thinking about that scene, and
Mhm.
I keep trying to think more like what is that telling us? Because that's the first introduction to the Exorcist, Max von Sydow's character.
Mhm.
Then we don't see him again until the last, I guess, 30 or 40 minutes of the movie.
It's if it adds some kind of atmosphere, like I don't mind that if you want to, or if it adds something to the character, if you want to tell some unrelated incident, but something like that just felt totally extraneous, and it feels like something you could have reworked, made far shorter, made far clearer, or keep it obtuse. Feels like too much with no payoff.
Yeah, I think a more economic version of the movie might have a few more scenes of Father uh, Harris and his mother's relationship, as opposed
Hmm.
to some of these scenes of what's her name, the mother, Reagan's mother's character. I don't
I
remember
know who
her
you're
name,
talking. I can't think of her name, but yeah.
but
No, I thought the
yeah,
same
like
thing.
those scenes with her at the college or with her friends. It's I don't know how much it does for the movie.
Yeah.
And whereas Father Karras, we have a good amount of movie about him and his mother, but once the whole movie gets to the point at the end where he's performing The Exorcist, there's just a little bit more I would have wanted to make that more effective.
Yeah. There's that scene where he's talking to their priest and he says, I'm losing my faith, or I've lost my faith. And then
Mhm.
that's just dropped. Like, why is he losing his faith? What's he doing about it? Like he just kind of says that. You feel like it's going to go somewhere. And then I'm sure that once he sees the demon, he knows that it's true. He's found his faith again. Then he kills himself. But I say it's moments like that where it's like, okay, now you've got something, and now you're just dropping it to go on. Now he's boxing. Okay, well, he's a boxer, great. So I,
Mhm.
yeah, I would have liked to have had more insight into his character. I would have liked to have had, if not less screen time of the Max von Sydow, at least more effective usage of the screen time. Definitely wanted either less of the mother or some explanation as to why any of these choices that were made for her had any relevance. I'm not going to say it's a mess, but it's a very kind of herky jerky, disjointed path that.
Yeah.
But the other half of it is it's so beautifully shot, and so like every scene is framed and everything is so that it's still super effective. Like you still are
Mhm.
fully invested in that. And when it gets to the exorcism, like it means something. And that's what I really love about it. That's what makes it a great film to me, is that it looks
Yeah.
beautiful and it builds to a satisfying conclusion.
Right, it sort of plants you in this, like, quote unquote realism, this sort of more realistic world that, something close to our world. And then it takes you to these places that are, farther out there and paranormal. I'm wondering, hearing you talk, I'm thinking about, these scenes where the policeman is investigating the murder and the, you know, um, whatever happened at the church. These things aren't directly answered. They're sort of outside of the movie, but so many scenes, so much screen time is dedicated to him coming, and
Yeah.
I was
But imagine
unsure of the
this.
purpose.
What if you cut every scene with that policeman out of the film? Does anything change? Do you lose anything?
I don't think you would. I mean, it's sort of a nice like comedic break in a way, and it's funny to have this sort of character that's going to be documenting the happenings of the movie. I guess that would be like he's the sort of detective, but it really doesn't have an effect like you're saying.
Yeah, like he doesn't really detect anything. He's a day late and a dollar short the whole way, and he doesn't show up and shoot the demon. He doesn't catch the
Right.
priest when he fall. He just he's really like, it's like he's just there because they had this kind of side thing going. So I think sometimes these entire stories get shot and lost, and then the remnants that are there don't really make sense. Like there may have been
Because
20 extra minutes of that guy that really makes sense.
what's fascinating to me is that the movie literally ends with him and the other priest.
Yeah.
So there has to be have been a purpose for that in some regard, for it to
Yeah.
be the
It reminded me of
last
like
thing in the movie.
Casablanca, where you got Louis and
Right.
Rick walking. And I'm like, it's like that, but you didn't earn like what? That'd be like if they
Yeah.
just brought Claude Rains in at the last scene to be like, well, we'll let you off the hook. No, you needed the whole thing where he was a dirt bag and he kind of slowly came around. And it sounds like I hate the movie. I really like the movie. I just
Yeah,
I've
no,
got
I
these
think
little
it's good that
gripes with it.
we're kind of analyzing it and reviewing it in this way because I don't think many people would do that. And
Maybe not, but
I
yeah.
think a lot of people talk its praise a lot of the time. But yeah,
Well,
again,
yeah,
I love the movie.
yeah, it's well deserved. Like I would certainly watch that again. I hope I get to see it in a
Mhm.
theater again. But yeah,
I want to know as far as your exploration of like early cinema and how you're saying that you kind of like movies outside of this era. I'm wondering, have you ever come across anything that's at all similar to this, or even sort of any sort of similar horror, possession kind of movie? Like, what is the context for The Exorcist?
doing it in like a real world setting the way they did it, where it's just this day to day life. We're not in some magical world. Like that was a lot different from anything that I've seen. Now there may be other films, but most films tend to be more like you're placed in this kind of imaginary universe where werewolves exist and vampires
Mhm.
exist and demons, and it's more just like a straight horror story where you understand that you're there to see hero and heroine navigate their way through some monster. There probably is like there's probably some film that I'm completely unaware of that, like 10 years before did something similar, but I think so also the 70s were like this was the still the early days of kind of this new kind of filmmaking where you didn't have this code and these kind of like there were, I'm sure you know this, but there were rules that like the good guy always had to win. Anybody that did bad either had to
Yeah.
die or be punished, and you couldn't show someone shot bleeding. There were just certain things you couldn't say or do in a film. So the plus side of opening that up is you give these people this creative freedom to create things that couldn't have been done before. The drawback, I think, or at least the learning curve is, and maybe this is why I'm not as big of a fan of like late 60s, 70s cinema, is it seemed like these directors were given too much freedom at once. Like you went from this studio system where everything
Mhm.
was like planned and regimented and looked over, and when the film was done, they cut it, and they kind of had like create this finished product that didn't have a lot of excess fat. It was like a just to the point. It wasn't really until maybe even the late 80s or the 90s that we got back to. I think there's this period where these directors just do whatever they want and they have these meandering films. Sometimes they work, often for me they don't. And I think maybe I'm meandering right now, but I don't think in my knowledge, there's no like kind of direct predecessor to The Exorcist. Like, I don't know that it came out of a vacuum, but demon movies were like Night of the Demon, or it was just more like there's a monster. This is the demon.
Mhm.
This is the monster. This is the hero.
Yeah.
He's gonna, Peter Cushing or Boris Karloff, whoever, he was gonna face the demon and vanquish it.
Yeah, I was just kind of trying to think through it, and I think what feels to me like the closest predecessor, and it's only like 3 or 4 years prior, is Rosemary's Baby. Is
Oh,
like
okay, perfect
that
example.
feels
Another
like
book
the
I have on the wall. Yeah.
closest thing I can think of. But again, that's only like that's like 1968 or 9. Like that's only a couple years before. Because then because I feel like prior to the collapse of the production code, it is just there's a scary monster, and now the monster hunter's gonna go fight him.
Yeah, I don't think you could do something as psychologically terrifying as this back in those days.
Hmm.
But yeah, Rosemary's Baby, that is probably the best answer of all, where demons, but on more of like a spiritual level, kind of inhabit. Yeah, that's
Well, you bringing up Rosemary's Baby kind of makes me think, like, because what was going on then in order for these two movies, both having to do with Satan or whatever, being put into the zeitgeist and captured, whereas I would say maybe The Exorcist is more of a positive faith affirming movie, and let's say Rosemary's Baby is more nihilistic, I would probably say. And I just kind of wondering, all these these thoughts are coming into my head right now. It's like you said, I've never seen a movie like this before. Um,
they're both based on books, and it could be that as these directors realized that hey, I can do whatever I want now. If I want to have a western where people are blood spattering everywhere in slow motion to that anything goes, maybe they started optioning these books that were previously considered unfilmable. Like, um, that could be it right there. That these works existed, but you couldn't do it on film, so people were doing it in literature, or I'm not sure where else. But like these stories were still being told. It's just you could finally tell them on movies. So somebody, Polanski, whoever got the idea, like, hey, I can make a really terrifying horror film that is terrifying in a completely. This is not Frankenstein's monster chasing you. This is, you know, mental. Like, is there a demon? Is there not? Am I crazy? Am I possessed?
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the classic, the basic tenet of like film criticism, the idea that movies reflect their times or whatever.
Hmm.
And I think there is that sense that in a time of social upheaval, that we get in like the late '60s, very violent time in America and around the world. And I think maybe in that context, the idea of this like incalculable evil lurking within the randomized individual around you. Like anybody could be possessed, like is I think maybe kind of a reflection of maybe some of the paranoia about just kind of the random violence that was seemingly constantly erupting in that time. I mean, I'm kind of, making
No,
that up,
that's
but I feel like there could be something there of just like people that stuff resonated with people because people felt very afraid just of the people around them.
That's very true. This reminds me. I was recently. I heard about how. So this is another film that might even be a predecessor. When Night of the Living Dead first came out, um, they didn't have the rating system we had today because they never dealt with a film like that. So that was kind of shown just as like another kiddie. So they would have like the kids matinee where you
yeah.
would go see Dracula or Creature from the Black Lagoon, and they would put that on, and you'd see like the person I heard this from, I think I read it somewhere, was like, in the same row as him, there was this little 8-year-old girl just sitting crying and frozen, and it just because they did it, they had to come up with ratings, and pretty soon they switched it. You couldn't go see it, but I think that was it. Is that you just weren't allowed to do these things before, so no one had done them. And once you could, Romero, uh, these Friedkin, Polanski, they realized like, hey, what the hell? Let's. And I think, and it probably was all a product of the times that we had. The world was not as. It's probably the same reason the code was gone, that the world was opening up to these new things, and it was the zeitgeist.
Mhm.
Well, this brings me to a question I have for you. Obviously, infamously, this movie, people walked out, people apparently fainted, and all this stuff. And I think it was probably banned. Um, some
Hmm.
places, I don't know. You could look that up, David. But what
On it.
effect do you think that like legacy has had? Um, being this sort of like touchstone movie where it's like, oh, it's the scariest movie. You'll never believe what you'll see.
Were you talking
Because movies back,
to oh,
I mean, open-ended question.
yeah.
Movies back in the day, like let's say, we say movies from the 30s, they'll say things like, "You will be so scared, you will be frightened beyond belief." And today we kind of look at those and just laugh. I
Yeah.
mean,
So that's a
but
funny thing
th-
though, because so like
mm,
the original Frankenstein with Karloff, when they first and I if this is what they reported, like I wasn't there, obviously, I'm not that old. Um, but when they showed that, people were fainting and people were leaving in fear, and like we watch that now and it's so tame, but
mhm,
society, people were different. They had never seen something like that. Or even just when they first showed like a train, people in the audience would duck when the train was coming at them because they just a train coming at you. And so there is kind of, it goes hand in hand as like something new comes along, society has never dealt with it and they're just not prepared for it. But then later you look back and you're like, how could anyone be scared by Frank? It's a great film. It's atmospheric, but it's not that scary.
mm,
But it scared the hell out of people to where they had to add that introduction where the guy comes out and says, this is really scary. If you need to
yeah.
leave, leave. Um, so yeah, I bet when The Exorcist, we saw it in a crowd and nobody threw up or ran away, but I could see the audiences in 74, 73 when that they had never experienced anything like that. Even I remember when the internet first came out and how people reacted and treated the internet. Now it's super different, but like when something new comes along that society is not ready for, it takes them a while to adapt. But then later you think, how silly, they couldn't handle that.
Yeah.
But you know, so yeah,
But
I think it was
do you
just
think this
another step.
movie remains as scary, or will? I guess that's my question in a way. Is like, does
Um,
it still have that effect, or is it slightly diminished, or is it really diminished at this point?
to answer that, I would probably need to talk to like somebody younger that's never seen it, but
Mhm.
who has seen modern horror films. It would be
Well,
interesting.
the guy next to me, Andrew Cuccetti, he had never seen it before, and he seemed pretty tense. There's a couple of the jump scares. He kind of went like, "Whoa!"
Okay.
I mean, those are jump scares, but I
Yeah,
think
so that's
after the
telling.
movie, he was like, my heart was pounding.
Yeah. Well, that's telling. I think because my gut reactions, I feel like this still holds up. Probably in large part because of demonic possession seems like it still strikes a chord in people. Um, but but
What do you
yeah,
think,
I
David?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure I'd ever call The Exorcist the scariest movie ever made, but I
Yeah.
do think that yeah, the demonic possession stuff though I think does resonate with people, and I think part of that is it's like going back a little bit is we were talking about the times and stuff as like I think in that moment of extreme kind of social upheaval there is something about like this very traditional religious horror of like, have we forgotten, did we, was that protecting us? And are we in moving away from that traditional sense, opening ourselves up to something horrifying? And I think that's what, why demonic possession still resonates with people, just kind of in general. is there's this sense that, as the world changes, is there some ancient evil we're allowing into our lives again? Which is like, I think, anxiety people have about just change and progress in general is that. So I think it still gets at something very gut in people. Though
Yeah.
I don't know if I would say it's scariest. I think you have to be perhaps more religious than I am to be super like because I know people who
Yeah, that
to
makes
this day
sense.
are like, I can't handle it because it's like, because they're like really really devout believers, and like the idea of demons really really scares them
Yeah.
in a way that
So
it
I
I mean, I
have
wasn't
to
wouldn't
ask,
necessarily for me.
what what is the scariest movie ever?
I I was trying to think what I would think the
Yeah.
scariest movie ever is. Uh,
Anyone
I'd
have an
probably
answer
say,
to that?
like, I think Texas Chainsaw or, like, The Shining for me are, like, those
mm,
are different kinds of horror movies,
So
but
still going
those,
back to older movies then.
yeah.
Texas Chainsaw's a
I
good
think
get, good pick.
more recently, a similar movie to The Exorcist, actually, like, Hereditary, I thought was
Mm.
one of the scariest movies I'd
That
seen
was
in
a
a
good
long
spooky
time,
movie.
and I think the Korean movie The Wailing is really scary.
Did you see Skinamarink? That really bothered me.
Yeah.
Uh,
I saw that they showed that at a theater near here, and I
yeah,
wanted to see it on a screen. I feel like that would have little effect on a TV, but
I totally, yeah. It was a There was moments in it where it doesn't work for a lot of people, but it really worked for me because it's just the whole movie is like this very grainy, at
yeah,
times out of focus. You're just looking at doors and corners of rooms and stuff. You don't see anybody. And there's a whole lot of stuff of just like your brain trying to figure out if you saw what you think you saw
yeah.
throughout it.
That was a
And that
fascinating movie.
really bothered me. Like, it like really got to me.
It didn't
Uh,
scare me as much, but it fascinated me. The
the
only movie I
phone
think
really got me in that.
the
That scene
throne.
where the
Oh, the
phone
phone. Yeah.
rings really loud. That was like, I was like, that was the closest where I was like, man, I might be out.
That was a shock for sure. The only movie I have ever seen that left me feeling unsettled was The Blair Witch Project, which
Great
I
pick.
saw in the theater when it was new. We went, and like just coming out, was an afternoon show to come out into the sunshine, but it's still just like for like a few days even, it was kind of this unsettling feeling of like it was a I don't know. I watched it again like on a TV not long after or not long ago. Um, didn't have quite the same effect, but the build up and to the end in that creepy house and the guy standing in the court, and it was just all like it really, that movie more than any, like I can't think of another movie as an adult. As a kid, I remember there were some that scared the hell out of me, but as an adult, that's the only movie that I don't want to say scared. I was like I was looking over my shoulder for a witch for the next week, but like it left me with a kind of a creepy feeling where I would kind of remember that scene and be like, oh, that was just a creepy scene. Um, the Blob was the movie that scared me as a kid. That was the one
Hell
where I
yeah.
was looking. Is the Blob? Is the Blob under the bed? Is the Blob on the seat? Like that was the one I was came on Creature Feature. I was probably 9 years old, and just that for a couple of years messed me up.
You
I was
guys
gonna
seen The
ask.
Wailing, the
I have
Korean
not seen
That
movie?
The
one I
Wailing.
don't know. The Wailing.
I think you guys should watch it. It's again, it's kinda like The Exorcist in a way where, the young girl is possessed, but it's incredible because it kind of does every sort of horror genre in one movie, like possession, serial killer,
Hmm.
paranormal, zombies, and in the middle of that movie, I was like, "Is this gonna be the scariest movie I've ever seen?" Because 'Cause I'm like, I don't know, those Koreans, they know what they're doing, that's what I'll say.
Yeah, I think East Asian horror in general, it's just, and part of it is just that, like, I have less cultural familiarity. So it's like
Mhm.
there's things that happen in it that are very unexpected to me.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna ask, kind of as we're starting to wrap up here, Exorcist,
Mhm.
massive legacy behind this movie, whole demonic possession stuff. Do you guys have any picks? Obviously, the wailing we just kind of got into, but any picks in the kind of demonic possession, exorcism subgenre of horror movies?
Well, okay. Does it count if I've never seen the film?
Well,
There's a
I'd
film
be
I've.
interested.
There's one I want to. Apparently, came out right after The Exorcist. It was sort of the black exploitation. It was called Abby, um,
Ooh.
where they were trying to do kind of like the Shaft version of The Exorcist. So,
Cool.
um, I've always been curious about that film. Um, but I don't know if I could, having never seen it, I can't necessarily recommend it. But I'll probably I'm more inclined now to watch it, having just watched The Exorcist again. But it's one I always heard about for years. It was like the kind of African American exorcist that just didn't have the budget to really pull it off the way The Exorcist did.
Warner Brothers sued Roger Corman over Abby because they claimed he
Oh
stole The
wow.
Exorcist.
That
That's
makes it even
awesome.
more
This has
interesting.
got to be this is a must watch.
Yeah.
How about you,
Um.
Antonio?
Yeah.
For me, it's hard to pick a movie with the same tone and like level of creepiness, but I think what comes to mind are like Fulci's movies, like Gates of Hell or The Beyond, as far
That
as
was
like
literally what I was gonna say.
these sort of like other world, like hell coming into our world, and these
I don't know
effects
those
of like,
films.
oh wow,
The
they're
Beyond is
really
a must.
yeah.
I'm not a big horror guy. I was going to also say The Evil Dead, especially the first
Mm,
Mm,
two. Maybe even the very
totally.
first one, which played it the most straight. But those were kind of possession films that I thought were good.
yeah.
But yeah, I've never delved too deeply. When I watch horror, it's usually like Evil Dead. My
Mm.
high school friend was like, "Oh, you got to see Evil Dead." And so I watched. I was like, "Yeah, you were right. That was bad, a good bad. Like that was a badass
Yeah.
movie." Um, but yeah. So say those again. That what were the two you recommended?
Um, it's called Gates of Hell or
Gates
City of
of
the
Hell.
Living Dead.
Yeah,
And then the
two
other one
titles
is
there.
The Beyond.
And they're by the same director.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Lucio Fulci.
Oh, Fulci.
So I
Okay, I
mean,
know him.
yeah, they're all fairly, they're campy in a certain sense. Like they're not taking themselves as seriously as The Exorcist is, and I think that's like why they're rewatchable.
Hmm.
The stories are kind of nonsense, but it's more about like the experience and the style.
So I know
I think,
Fulci from his spaghetti westerns,
Yes.
yeah,
but
Yeah, his horror stuff is all pretty gross. It's like all pretty viscerally. His horror stuff is all usually pretty viscerally nasty. It's lots of pretty gross
or
effects and like
are
a lot of
these like
dream logic.
giallo films? Would these be qualified as giallo or just
Some
no,
of
after
them,
that? Yeah.
not
he's
these
made
specific
giallo.
ones.
Yeah, he's made giallo movies, but these would be like because they're supernatural and have to do with like demons and hell. And it's not like one killer. It's usually like possession or zombies and things like that.
Huh.
It's more in the like
Yeah.
Lovecraftian territory.
I
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
they're
it's
Lovecraft.
a
great
good rack.
Can I
if you
give
can
a
stomach them.
non-film recommendation? I just read
Of
this.
course.
Are you guys comic readers at all?
Yeah.
Sometimes.
There's probably I guess not even problem. My favorite comic writer is Ed Brubaker,
Okay.
and he'll do crime noir. He'll do some supernatural stuff. He'll do kind of these Lovecraftian things. Um, and I guess I thought I had everything he'd ever done, but he had done like an e-comic I didn't know about, like a digital only comic that was collected recently, called Friday. And reading it, the best I could come up with, I was trying to describe it to a friend. I was like, if H.P. Lovecraft had written Encyclopedia Brown, you'd get Friday. So
Huh.
if that's your thing, it's an Encyclopedia Brown character and his sidekick, but they're in this kind of small town that's very kind of Arkham-like, with like spirit forest demons and tentacled monsters, and solving the kind of cases that Encyclopedia Brown never encountered. So
Hell yeah.
since you mentioned Lovecraft, since I just finished it yesterday, I had to throw that out there. Friday. There's 3 trades now. Well
Nice.
worth reading.
Nice. Well, guys, you guys got anything else you want to add on The Exorcist? Any final thoughts on The Exorcist?
I'm curious as to know, any of our listeners what kind of their thoughts are on this movie particularly, and then what they might be think is the scariest movie, or if they think this movie's still scary.
Yeah,
One
no,
last
that'd be
question I
great to
wanted to
know. Yeah. Yeah.
one last question I wanted to ask Greg is, having seen it as a teenager and now you're, an adult and a father, has that aspect of now you're a father, has that had any effect on your viewing?
You know,
Mm,
that does in a lot of there's a lot of things in my life that I revisit now as a father, and it totally
Mhm.
not so much this though, because I think, it's so removed from reality to me. Like, I'm an
Mhm.
atheist. I was raised Catholic, but
mhm,
Yeah.
I describe myself as I'm religious but not spiritual. Like,
interesting.
I'm all about the tradition and the feast days and the saints and the high mass and the Latin mass and the stained
Mhm,
glass, and but I don't believe any of it. I think, so I don't worry about my famously tomorrow Giacomo will wake up talking in tongues, but I don't worry about my kids getting possessed by demons. So like where I get more bothered is like
yeah.
a film where like a child is abducted or a child is
Mhm.
harmed in some way. Um, but overall, I feel like when I saw it the first time, I was young and I really didn't have the wherewithal to see it as anything beyond like a movie about a possession, like an exciting, scary movie. It was really interesting to see it now with like a whole lifetime of film watching behind me to appreciate kind of the grandeur of the film and just the beauty
Mhm.
of the film and how even without that exorcism, just some of the shots, like the priest arriving at that house in
Oh,
Georgetown,
yeah.
or like
Incredible.
there's just like the way it looks and the way it kind of flows together as visual art
Mhm.
was all lost on me as a younger
Mhm.
viewer. How
Totally.
about you? No, I guess neither of you are. You
No.
have a cat, I see. Did you
I do
worry
have a
about?
cat, but, and it would be bad if she was possessed by a demon. I'd be pretty upset with her if Pazuzu got a hold of her, but,
I think, my
Used to.
enjoyment of like, this movie and horror movies, I mean, maybe this is something common in horror fans, but, having, like I mentioned before, these, like, experiences when I'm at a young and impressionable age and being scared of these stories and images, make me, like, later in life sort of gravitate towards them, possibly seeking that thrill again, I'm not sure.
Mm,
Um, I think, obviously these technical aspects, like, that's what I enjoy a lot nowadays, but I think there's a certain, it's weird to call it charm, but because it's disturbing to me, but the makeup and the green, how green the pea
yeah,
soup is, like,
there's a
coming
certain
out. It's
charm
like,
to that projectile
right.
vomit.
It doesn't need to be constantly bloody. Even the blood
Yeah,
is like very bright red, something, there's a theatrical, fantastical element that I really like.
yeah. Maybe one of my favorite, like maybe my favorite part of the experience. Um, I usually end up going to movies alone nowadays because I'll want to see like the baby. I can't talk anyone into seeing that with me, so I'll so often I got like a season pass for the Paramount here when they did like their summer movie, and like I would always kind of walk out and you see those groups out front, like, yeah, Hitchcock did that. It was nice seeing it with the group when we kind of walked out and the five of us kind of like could chat. There was something fun about seeing the film, not just with an audience, but with my own kind of like group in the audience.
Yeah.
That I really enjoyed because a lot of times I walk out, I just want to talk about the movie. And
Right.
short of just butting in, like, hey guys, can I join your circle? So it's just like, I'm the one walking off thinking, like, overhearing things and like, that's interesting. So that was maybe the most fun of all. And
I'm
seeing
glad
Jack
we could
Black.
catch it together. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
no, it was great. Yeah.
all right. Well, thanks for listening, guys. You can follow us on social media, at Different Frames Podcast. We're also on YouTube if you want to, put some comments about what you thought. But yeah, go ahead and like and follow our videos and review us, please, if you've